Absolutely. I think we've got, so I'm just looking at the faces, I think we've got most of the people we're expecting now.
Morning.
Checking through list. Hi there, Roger. Okay, I think, well, we've got importantly, we've got the people that are presenting the first items and that, so I think we've got the most important people at the moment, so I think we're good to make a start. So yes, we'll kick things off. So welcome everyone to the Gloucestershire Economic Growth Scrutiny Committee. Our first item on the agenda today is, so I just jumped back to the top of my papers. Apologies. I know Councillor Andrew Miller's covering for, and I can't remember off the top of my head who it was you were covering for now, so apologies, Andrew, but we'll update the minutes to reflect that. I don't know if Rachel, you know, we can catch up afterwards and fill that one in. I don't know if anyone's aware of any other apologies though.
Rebecca Halifax is trying to get in, so she'll be here any minute now, hopefully. Well, I think Paul Baker's the same. Oh, he's here.
No, Paul's here. Full now, yes.
Rebecca's trying to get in, yeah.
Okay, well, we'll get started, and if necessary, we can catch people up. Yeah. So the second item we should need to run through are declarations of interest. I'm going to assume there are none unless anyone indicates. And if not, we can jump straight into our first of the main items. So we'll be handing over to Neil Hopwood for the Gloucestershire Infrastructure Investment Fund programme and an update from that was kindly held over from last time, I believe, wasn't it, to for timing reasons. So thank you, Neil, and we'll hand over to you for that one.
I've got the presentation here. Is it best if I share it on my PC? It's probably I'll try that.
Okay, we've got you now, yeah.
Everyone see that okay? Sorry, let me just put it onto slideshow view. Is that better?
Well, we've got the presenter view at this end, which tells us what you're going to show next.
Interesting. You just I think probably it's because I've got it on two monitors. It might be. It's probably why. Just bear with me a second.
Yeah, it's okay now.
Yeah, it's because I'm running it off two monitors. Let me just try this, see if this works better.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay, well, good morning all. Thanks for the opportunity just to talk about the Gloucestershire Infrastructure Investment Fund. Just a quick sort of straw poll, if I could, around the room, is that how many of the members present are actually familiar with the fund? Just sort of a quick shout out, yes or no, if you can, because I can't see everybody on the screen at the moment.
No.
Broadly, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So bit of a mix by the sounds of it. Okay, fine. So just before we sort of dive into the presentation, it was originally it was a grant fund, the Growing Places Fund, that was originally awarded back in 2012, I think, initially, and there was an option for local authorities and LEPs to, sort of be quite flexible with it. So within Gloucestershire, we decided to use it as a revolving loan fund, and in essence, what the fund does is that it provides gap funding where quite often conventional sort of means of funding they want usually a call on an asset. So if you're buying, a property or trying to build a property, the loan provider will want a call on that asset. Whereas if you're trying to do something, build something new, quite often the asset doesn't exist. You might have some land or, a small piece of land. But and so typically that's where the fund comes in, is where there's very commercially viable projects, but just that they can't potentially fund the full sort of requirement to get the project underway. And typically what happens with the projects is that once the sort of initial funding has created an asset, they'll generally then refinance the project, effectively remortgage the project, or reloan it in some way, shape or form, so that they can then repay the gift loan, so we can then recirculate that cash. But it means that it's been very successful in terms of creating infrastructure and assets that we're struggling to get off the ground, and we can go through, and there's a couple of really interesting ones we can dig into in a bit more detail as we go through, but that's the sort of the background to the project, and sorry, the fund. And so we'll talk through quickly. Just this sort of slide is a good overview of all the projects that have been sort of supported to date. So the top two were the sort of the two sites, two quite challenging brownfield sites, one in Cheltenham, one in Gloucester, that were both kind of regarded as what they call gateway sites, but had struggled to get funding to support the build of both of those sites. They were both essentially extra care homes, and both are now fully open, up and running, operating successfully with reasonably good occupancy levels. And so two very sort of high value facilities that have been created, and obviously it's entirely funded effectively through the private sector, but just with the loan fund to get the thing moving. So to give you an example, Honeybourne Gate, which is the one in Cheltenham on the top of the list there, so a £2.75 million investment from the gift fund drew in £13.4 million worth of private sector investment. And you can see as you go down the list, so Parkview, the one in Gloucester, was about nearly 6 million. M5 Services is probably the most famous one. I mean, that £3 million loan leveraged in £20 million worth of private sector investment, and they were struggling at the time to sort of get that gap funding to complete the southbound services, sort of almost in parallel with the northbound services. And that's now a Gloucestershire icon that we've created. It's probably done more to put Gloucestershire on the map than almost any other thing that's been done in the last sort of 10 years or so. And it's now ideally a destination almost, which is slightly contrary to the planning kind of conditions, but people will potentially skip other services to stop there instead. The next one, Dudbridge Estate, which is the Stroud Metal company, is a really interesting one. I was going to suggest we just have a little bit more of a look at that one, because that's done two things really. That's released a brownfield site in the centre of Stroud, predominantly for housing, and a retail unit. But that's been very instrumental in terms of Stroud Metal developing their business and cementing that business in Gloucestershire. They were constrained in terms of growing the business, and so they needed to relocate to a new site. The site they were in was really severely constrained, and so that's been a very successful project. Again, about £6 million worth of investment, and you can see in terms of jobs, there's some significant jobs that have landed on the back of that. Shieldhouse Data Centre is an interesting one. That was quite a innovative project, and again you can see levered in nearly over £12 million worth of investment. Relatively small in terms of jobs, but really significant in terms of infrastructure, in terms of what it provides for the county. We've got the Merry Walk scheme, which again has really been transformational for Stroud. It was only a relatively small loan, but again, it was the sort of the final piece of the jigsaw really that allowed that scheme to proceed on the timeframes that were originally sort of planned. Baker's Quay is a more recent one, so that's really to fund the second phase of the Baker's Quay development, so the maltings and the malthouse extension. And then the final one is the 270 climbing centre, which is actually just started work. Recently, just up the road from me. Actually, I live in Brockworth, so I can walk up there, and the inflatable domes have now come down on that one, so that's quite an exciting one. Okay, so just a quick flick through really some of those projects. So the Honeybourne Gate scheme, has provided in terms of facilities that creates for the county. We've now got a facility with 54 extra care apartments, very highly regarded and successfully operating now, and has been for several years. This is the Shield House data center. So it's based in Barnwood, for those of you that aren't aware. And the interesting thing with this is that it's a highly secure data center that gives Gloucestershire something relatively unique in that it's got high capacity storage for sort of effectively, this is effectively a cloud data center, but very high security, and particularly it's got very high levels of connectivity. It's got at the moment something like 12 different carriers coming into the building, so it's got extremely high resilience and also options of what networks the clients use. They can plug into a number of different networks, and that it's been quite challenging, that project. It's because they're offering something slightly different, but over a longer term, I think that's going to prove to be a very successful investment. Gloucester Services, I mean, probably everyone is pretty familiar with the services, but that's had a huge impact locally in terms of local jobs, somewhere in the region of 150 jobs from local sort of residents, and nearly all of the producers that they use are local to Gloucestershire. And the other big aspect there is that that's been delivered in partnership with Gloucestershire Gateway Trust, and which is a sort of a social enterprise, and that would deliver something like £10 million worth of funds to the Gateway Trust over the next 20 years. Something certainly from a scrutiny point of view that no doubt you'll be interested in is the governance of the fund. So it's governed between essentially the accountable body team at the county council and the LEP. We have a monthly programme management group meeting where this fund is reviewed in terms of sort of decisions and recommendations to the accountable body. All investment decisions are scrutinised initially by the LEP investment panel. So that's an independent panel, basically, that you can see the list of the current panel members there, drawn from a wide range of private sector and public sector sort of partners. And I sit in on those meetings, and the projects that come to those meetings get extremely well sort of scrutinised and tested quite significantly, and certainly the any of the sort of questions around the business case or the viability of those projects gets tested from the promoter's point of view as well. So it really forces them to do a lot of work to make sure that the project is really on sort of sound financial footing. There's also an independent due diligence study undertaken for every project as well. So through the accountable body team, again, we have an independent auditor effectively that will do the due diligence on the project, and particularly often looking at things like state aid, because predominantly these are all private sector led schemes. There's a very much a question of sort of making sure that because the loan is offered effectively on an interest-free basis, they look at it with a view of potentially from a state aid point of view. So, and then once the investment panel has reviewed the scheme and made a recommendation, it will then go to the LEP board for final approval. And then once the approval's been given, it will then go back to the accountable body. So the actual legal contracts are then drawn up by the accountable body, so that there's full legal sort of basis for the loan. Before I finish, short and sweet, but that photograph there actually is an artist's impression of the new climbing centre that's going to be built at Bentham, which is where the old Bentham sort of domes were. So as I mentioned, they've actually started work on site there now. So I think the plan for that is that that will be complete and up and running sort of by the end of this year. That's me done. Short and sweet, this one.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Neil. That's brilliant.
Going to take any questions.
Yeah, we'll open it up to questions. I mean, if it's all right, I'll start. I can't, so I'll have to look at the exactly who's indicating. So okay, we have got a few hands. Sorry. In that case, we'll start with Paul Baker and then Nikki after Paul.
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Matt?
Yep, we've got you.
Thank you. Neil, thank you very much for that. I noticed all the funding is sort of currently committed apart from the reserve figure, but that repayments are going to be happening in the third quarter. Do we have projects in the pipeline for that money when that money comes back?
Not very many at the moment, actually, I think. So I think that's definitely one of the things that we need to start promoting now. So and there's a major repayment due this quarter, basically. So, and then the funds are fully committed because we've got the second phase of Baker's Quay that is coming along. But so there is scope to then to start to promote the scheme again. You know, so we'll be looking to do that, you know, in the next few months, really, to start to sort of because the funds were committed. There's you know, we haven't been publicising it, but so that's the next thing to do now, is to really start to promote the fund again.
Okay, Nikki, I've got you next on the list. Nikki, I'm sorry, I'm not sure if you're talking. We can't hear you at the moment. I'll.
Sorry, I was having difficulty unmuting.
Oh yeah, we've got you now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of questions, if I may. It's always a loan, never a straight grant. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
And it's just one of funding stream of many that you have at the LEP?
I wouldn't say many. At the moment, we've got, this is one of the streams available. We currently don't have any grant funds available. We've obviously, the most recent one was the Getting Building Fund, which is fully committed. So we're waiting, like sort of everybody else at the moment. There's the Levelling Up white paper, which will be published, we hope, in the next couple of weeks. And within that, we'd expect to see some clarity on sort of future funds that might become available. I think it's probably highly likely that, you know, there'll be funds. I mean, we've just had the Levelling Up sort of round 1, I think, and some round 2 funding is starting to come through now for the Levelling Up, but that typically is not routed through LEPs. That predominantly goes through local authorities. So we're waiting to see on that. So at the moment, certainly in the immediate future, that there's no schemes that, you know, we can promote other than this one.
And sorry, last question. With going back to this gift one, is always has to be commercially viable, does it? Because otherwise you won't get your loan back, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, I mean, the fund does have the facility. You know, it does take a slightly different view in terms of risk, I think. I mean, the scheme still has to be viable, but, you know, one of the great advantages of the fund is that, you know, we can take a slightly longer term view and look at schemes that, you know, might not be fundable quite so easily through conventional means. And I think that's you know, been proven with some of the schemes we funded. So, you know, the scheme has to stack up financially, but, you know, there is a slightly different approach. So,
that's the point.
You know, there is some.
Is to get things going that wouldn't normally. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Okay, next I've got Roger.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, there's some really interesting and useful stuff there, but a question I have is really about who consults who in terms of deciding which schemes, if you like, that local authorities would be keen to fund. And what I have particularly in mind is Honeybourne Gate, because probably at the time when it was decided to fund it, it was probably the right thing to do, or at least I don't have evidence that it was the wrong thing to do. But things change, and I'm at the point where I left Cheltenham Borough Council in May, and there's a Cheltenham Borough member here may wish to comment further. But at that point, the view was, I think, arrived at that we really didn't want to be sort of encouraging more large-scale care home developments, because there were a lot of them already in Cheltenham, and there was a danger that we would be over provided or would become a magnet for that sort of thing, which was not particularly where the Borough Council wanted to go in terms of its development, in terms of what it would do to the demographic. So it's more of a general question than a specific question on Honeybourne Gate, but it is a question about how we keep on top of those kind of requirements and changing requirements.
Do you want me to take that one, Neil? So,
yeah, by all means. I mean, I was going to chip a couple of things in, but you
I mean, the key thing is, Roger, that we wouldn't fund a scheme through gift funding unless it's received planning permission. So it would have had to have gone through the normal planning processes within any of the districts before it would receive any funding from gift. So that would be your opportunity as districts to influence the process of whether a scheme would go ahead or not.
I need to come back on that because, as you know, planning permission can't be sort of refused on the grounds that the planning authority or the councillors on the planning authority don't like the idea for other reasons than planning. So if the scheme stacks up in planning terms, it has to be passed either by the committee or on appeal. So I think there is a question to be answered there about whether the development is appropriate, irrespective of planning.
I mean, I think that's where the investment panel comes in, because you've got a very broad mix of people on the panel, and the advantage that as a LEP we have is that we can kind of make those decisions on a much broader range of parameters. So, and because there's a limited fund, we can make decisions. And we've had a few instances where people have applied for the fund and they've been refused for various reasons. So I mean, David's absolutely right. I mean, one of the first criteria is they've got to have planning approval. But second, it's really that investment panel process, I think, that is where we have that opportunity. And because of the members of that, they're people who are sort of very much, certainly the private sector, some of the private sector members are looking to the future and saying, well, is this, what's the long-term sort of viability for this project? And does it, I think one of the key kind of criteria that the panel uses is really, is this good for Gloucestershire? So they can therefore sort of take a broader view on that and say, well, okay, the scheme, because I mean, there's lots of schemes that would be viable. I mean, we could build supermarkets everywhere, but because of that independent investment panel, they can take that slightly broader view. So I think, that's, and I think at the time it was probably that. I mean, that was one of the first projects that was funded through the scheme. So I guess at the time, there probably was a perceived growing demand for that kind of facility, and there was a difficult site, I guess, at the time. I mean, that was before I joined the LEP, so I've not got the full history on that. But that was probably, I mean, at the time would have been a decision that would have been taken, with sort of in best faith, as it were. But I think, yes, I think that's kind of the. You've got the two-pronged approach really. It's the planning is one area where you've got a bit of scope, and then the second bit is that investment panel approach.
Thanks, and it was a difficult site. Thanks.
Okay, I've got Paul McCloskey next on the list then.
Thank you. I must admit I share Roger's view on that. Yes, we can got to deal with the planning applications we get. We don't necessarily want more retirement homes, but that's right. The question I had really was why, bear in mind this is public money, why we are giving interest-free loans to the private sector. I could understand some special cases, but to almost have a blank blanket policy that says we're giving interest-free loans seems surprising, because I would assume that if I was a private investor wanting to invest in these things, I'd be expecting 6%, 10%, or I don't know exactly, but it just seems a bit generous. Let's leave it like that.
They have to demonstrate through the due diligence process that this is a loan of last resort, so that there's not funding available elsewhere. So the due diligence process wouldn't. So Neil used supermarkets as an example. There's not a cat and hell's chance a supermarket could come to us and get a gift loan, because they wouldn't be able to demonstrate that there wasn't funding available from elsewhere. So they have to be able to demonstrate that this is effectively loan of last resort, and the scheme won't go ahead without this loan, and that's all done through due diligence process.
It's probably there is an admin fee, so it's not entirely. They do have to pay an admin fee, which covers the all of the due diligence costs and the sort of admin costs of the the process. So it's not entirely free in that sense. And the thing to bear in mind, they are quite short-term loans as well. Typically 2 to 3 years at the most. So I think that's the whole point, is that it allows that asset to be created, which they can then refinance.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Alistair, I've got you next.
Hi, thank you, Chair. With regards to items that might not generate a specific revenue for the loan, but it would give a greater impact to the county. For example, there's a working group I'm helping with in Gloucester at the moment with the Wildlife Trust, members from the Gateway Trust, which Neil referenced, that Pinnacle with the service station, M5 service station. They get a social approximately 10 million the next 10 years from them to put through into community groups. So what the working group is it's a sculpt. Bear with me, because a lot of people might be against this idea, so I'm just going to put it out there. It's a sculpture similar to the Angel of the North or the Wicker Man down south on the Robinswood Hill. Obviously, it's the very early stages. It's a working group. And they looked at information from Gloucester, G1st, LEP, 2019 analysis of Gloucester's visitor economy. And there was an analysis of this type of structure, and it showed that economic impact to the proposal may give 5% growth to the city within the first 3 years, and that would possibly be an additional spend. And that's similarly shown with the example Neil gave for the services. There's 40 million people drive down the M5 every year, and a very small amount of those people, minuscule in fact, call into Gloucestershire. They literally just bypass. And then to have something Pinnacle that could represent Gloucestershire on the hill. Everyone's familiar with Robinswood Hill when they go down the motorway. That could attract people to pull over on their journey down to Devon or Cornwall, spend some money in our area. I think would be a great thing, but it wouldn't be a generation of money directly from the sculpture, but it would generate money from people staying in hotels and have stopover, spending money at the docks, going to some feature in the Cotswold, etc. And I did some research on the Angel of the North. And in 2008, it's not a massive structure, the Angel of the North. It's only sort of about 18 meters tall. It had an estimated amount of 8,000 people a week in the first few years to Newcastle and Gateshead. And it helped generate a further £150 million locally in national lottery funding. And it's been identified to help generate a lot of revenue in the immediate area. A lot of people came there to take photos, spend money, etc. So what with obviously I appreciate your comments. You'll have to get planning permission and whatnot before you can even look at funding. But it'd be good to see if there was an option there for the working group to say, subject to funding, would we be able to get some? Subject to planning, would we be able to get some funding? Is there opportunities like that?
Not from this funding source, because this is very rigidly loan funding. So you'd have to demonstrate how over a 2 or 3 year period you were going to pay the loan back, whoever the sponsoring organisation was for it. So it would have to be a different funding stream from this one. As Neil said earlier, we haven't got any clarity on what those funding streams might look like at the moment.
Like I said, a more likely one, Alistair, might be the Arts Council actually, because Gloucester City rather has been nominated as a priority place by the Arts Council, and that's based on a particular metric, which is that per head of population, Gloucester has received very little funding from the Arts Council in the previous sort of 10 years or so. And they have a capital fund, particularly, which potentially you could apply to. It would probably need some significant match funding, but that is a grant fund, and obviously it's very much arts based, and something like the Angel of the North, is very much viewed as an arts investment that then has those peripheral sort of benefits. So that would probably be the one to look at in reality, or at least one of the options to look at.
Thank you so much, Neil, for that. I'll pass that back to the working group. Thank you.
Okay, Sarge, I've got you next on the list.
Thanks, Chair. I've just got two questions, really. The first one is, how many gift loan applications were received and how many were refused? And through what sort of channels is the scheme promoted? Because personally, it's the first time I've become aware of the scheme, and I'm sure there's many potential budding entrepreneurs out there and businesses who, would perhaps be interested in applying. Should there be more funding in the future? Thank you.
David, I haven't got the information on how many we've received and refused to hand. I'd have to get that, unless David, you've got it.
No, I haven't got it on hand, so we can get that to you certainly. I think on the second point, because of the way in which the funding's worked and the commitment, so generally the loan wouldn't be for less than £1 million. So we have had people come to us for very small loans, and the investment panel have said it's going to cost. Frankly, it's going to cost too much for them to go through the process and pay the legal fees to get an interest-free loan than it would and going down other means, and it will be too much of an administrative burden to be able to manage lots of smaller loans. We are looking at how you might manage smaller loans in the longer term, though, because we know that there's some real demand amongst businesses. So promotion goes through investment panel members, LEP board members, and business groups, and also local authorities. So the economic development leads in the local authorities and others are aware of the scheme, and a number of the schemes have come forward via that route. So Baker's Quay, for example, came with support of Gloucester City, I think, Neil, didn't it, when that scheme came forward?
That's right, yeah.
So it's a whole variety of routes. The reason that we don't shout hugely loudly about it is because, as you can see from the figures, there's no money available at the moment, and actually the money, when it becomes available, goes out quite quickly because of this pipeline of projects that we've got running. So we don't want to go out to the wide world and say, come and ask for a loan from us. But we're more than happy to talk to anyone who might have some ideas for schemes that they think could get away on a loan basis.
Thank you for answering my questions. I just wanted to add that looking at the list earlier, some of the schemes that have been delivered as a result of the loans have been really beneficial to their local areas and in terms of jobs as well. So thank you.
That's great. And then last on the list, Gina.
Thank you, Chair. I was interested in that mention about interest rates. If interest rates are going to change, which I'm sure they will, the value of this fund will erode over time. So is there no idea in the future to actually perhaps have some interest rate element, or will you be adding to the fund, more money to the fund? Otherwise, it's and of course with inflation too, the value will go down. Thank you.
So on the second point, we've been pitching to government for some time now, because as Neil said, I think it was 2012 that the scheme first came into place, and as you see, it's been really successful. It's recycled the money 2.5 times already, and the private sector leverage that we've got from the scheme's been incredibly successful. And so we've been talking to government probably since about 2015 to say this really works for Gloucestershire. And the reason it works for Gloucestershire is because some elements of our economy are doing very well, but unlocking some of these key projects needs a loan rather than necessarily grant funding. And so we have been making a really strong pitch through investment panel and through other routes to say we need to increase this funding mechanism in the next round of funding. But as Neil said earlier, we're still waiting for clarity on what that might look like, what UK Shared Prosperity Fund might look like, and whether there are opportunities for similar funding or to add to this pot, because it has been really successful, and we're pretty sure there are more schemes out there that we could be funding if the pot were larger and we had more money available. At the moment, there's no plan to start to charge interest on the loans, except for where occasionally people default. And when I say default, it means that their payback time periods are slower than they predicted when they applied for the loan, and therefore we do then, after a period, start to charge interest. But we're not at the moment planning to charge interest on general loans. As Neil said, there is quite a heavy admin fee for people to pay. So they've got to pay all of the legal costs of drawing up contracts, and those legal costs can be quite large depending on how much to and fro there is between the applicant's solicitors and the accountable body's solicitors. So there is a cost to pay, but we're not planning at the moment to charge interest.
Okay, so I can't see anyone else on the indicating a question or anything. So I just wanted to say, well, thank you very much for all the questions, and thank you, Neil and David, for answering all the questions and for what's been a really useful presentation. So, sorry, I've got Alistair just indicating.
Thank you for that, Matt. I appreciate the comment on interest. You don't want to put the businesses, you want to help them grow, etc. Is there a way of building in a term where you get some sort of rebates on profit? So as long as they're profitable, they're making some money, there's a goodwill rebate that's returned back to the LEP. That way they're not under any stress. I don't know, if they make 100 million, they give 1% back profit, something tied in that way. I've seen that done commercially within contracts. And that way, if they're just managing to pay the loan and they're just getting by treading water, they're not under pressure. But it's literally done at the end of the year.
Yeah, we have done that on, I think it's only on one of the projects so far, isn't it, Neil, where we have done that. We've said if the value of the scheme goes up by a certain amount, then there'll be a payback.
On the Merry Walks
staged payback. So if the value of the Merry Walks, was Merry Walks Shopping Centre, now Five Valley Shopping Centre, goes through a threshold of valuation, then Dransfield Properties will start to pay back some elements of the profit that they make, the additional value that they release on, they realise on that capital.
So can that get sort of blanketly rolled out for everyone else? Because that's not putting anyone at risk. It's a goodwill return of finances back to the public. It can go on and build up a pot of money.
Yeah, I think it's largely down to the nature of the project. So for all but Merry Walks to date, there wasn't a feeling through the due diligence process that the capital asset would increase in value significantly enough to get to that point of getting any money back in. With Merry Walks, it was felt because of the value of the asset when they started the project compared to where it could get to, that might be the case. So it's done on a case by case basis. So where it's not realistic that we're ever going to get anything back, it's an overcomplication in the legal contracts. Where we think there is an opportunity to get something back, then yeah, absolutely, we would put that clause in.
I think it's probably, I mean, it may well be that there's time. It is time to sort of, I mean, the fund is in an interesting position now. So, and the macroeconomic outlook very much looks like interest rates are going to be going up. So you know, there's probably an opportunity to just review that over the next 6 months or so in terms of how we operate the fund. But I think that it'd be very interesting to see if we do get, you know, the potential to top it up a bit in the next sort of, you know, year or so. And I think that you know, the evidence is there in terms of the performance, and so you know, we can make a good case for it. So I think, yeah, definitely, you know, it's time to have a review. I think is probably fair comment.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll just reiterate and just say thank you very much for introducing that item, and thank you to everyone for all the questions on it.
Yeah,
so the
no
second sort of substantive item we got on the agenda today is around the strategic planning in Gloucestershire. So Mike Dawson's going to talk us through what's I guess an annual update on the various strategic and local plans in Gloucestershire.
Good morning, Chair. Firstly, apologies for being late joining the meeting this morning. We had connection issues here at Tewkesbury, and which delayed us. And I'm not quite sure whether anybody has given Councillor Tony Dale's apologies for him not being able to attend this morning's meeting. Tony, of course, is chair of the Economic Joint Committee, and he would normally be here, but he's not able to be here this morning. So I'll present his apologies, if that's okay. In presenting this report to you, could I introduce Sandra Ford, who is Head of Development Services here at Tewkesbury Borough, and will be presenting the report for you. This is a report that has been presented to the Economic Growth Joint Committee at his last meeting. It's one that officers from across the whole county put together as an update report, really, for members, and on that basis it is for noting, but in some ways it's a bit of a reference point for members on where all the plans are at any one time in Gloucestershire. So without wanting to steal Sandra's thunder any more, I'll hand over to Sandra to present the report to the committee chair. Thank you.
Good morning, members. As Mike said, what I'm planning to do with this sort of report is just go through where each council is, with their respective sort of plans. Also contained within the report is an update from the County Council in connection with the key strategic plans that they are got adopted and also will be reviewing. I'm also just going to update in connection with key strategic sort of projects which are happening within Gloucestershire. And finally, I'll just give an update in connection with the latest on the MPPF as far as I can. Just a caveat that obviously I work for Tewkesbury, and all of this report has been compiled by officers across the whole of Gloucestershire districts. So unfortunately, I don't know all of the details of specific projects contained within the respective local authorities. So I may not be able to answer any questions if you have on any of those specific sort of projects. So without further ado, I'll just go through each of the respective sort of councils. And again, all of this is detailed within the report. So Stroud District Council, it has an adopted plan, and as with all of the councils, actually, it has commenced a review of its local plan. As you'll be aware, when you think you've got one plan adopted, we have to go through another review. So their review is currently underway. It has been submitted to the Secretary of State, and they're expecting to have an examination in public sometime this year. For Tewkesbury, Cheltenham and Gloucester, as you'll be aware, we have a joint core strategy that was adopted back in December 2017, and we are currently reviewing the joint core strategy. We did an issues and options consultation a couple of years ago, and I think it's fair to say that the update of the JCS perhaps hasn't progressed as quickly as we would have liked. However, we have now appointed consultants to support us with the review of the JCS and very much now looking at a revised timetable for the JCS going forward. The other council I want to just talk about is the Forest of Dean, and again, Forest of Dean have an adopted core strategy, but they are also reviewing their plan, and they have a preferred options consultation is expected in the summer and autumn of this year. So as I say, all of the councils are progressing well on their plans. And the Cotswold District Council again has an adopted plan. They are also reviewing their sort of plan, and my understanding is that they're looking at a Reg 18 consultation is expected in early of 2022. So I think across the board, you know, all councils have adopted plans, but obviously we're all into reviews as well at different sort of times. I think it's fair to say that development is very strong across the whole of the county, with both housing and employment activity across the board, which is to be welcomed. In terms of the County Council, you'll see on page 19 of your report that it lists a number of plans that the County Council are responsible for, strategic documents, and also it lists the plans that the dates that they were adopted. It shows the number of plans that have been adopted and a number that are also under review as well. And there's a set out on the table. I'm not going to go through each of those because as you'll see from the table, there are quite a few that the county are responsible for. Turning to key projects that we have across the county, members will be aware that there is currently a consultation underway on the M5 Junction 10 proposals. The consultation will expire on the 15th of February, and the consultation details are available online. Major changes proposed to the junction, and obviously that is very much to facilitate the housing and economic growth that we need within sort of that part of the county. And obviously it's also related to the government HIF funding for improvements to the junction and also the associated roads in that sort of vicinity. Again, talking about the M5 at Junction 9 and the A46, very much around the offline solution. The County Council are leading on considering sort of options for the new A46 alignment, and the Council has applied to the Department of Transport for the large local majors funding to be able to take that sort of forward. However, in connection with, so work is ongoing in connection with routes, and obviously consultation is expected this year on potential options as to what that realignment could be. Turning to the A417 missing link, again another key project that's been taken forward within the county, and just to update that this is progressing, and this is being taken forward as a development consent order application. So that application has been submitted to the Planning Inspectorate, and my understanding is that will be heard sometime this year. And again, members will be aware this is a key plank for the regeneration and to facilitate development within the county. The report sets out on page 22 to 23 and 24 a number of key projects that are happening within the county, which sets out regeneration, housing schemes that are progressing. I wasn't proposing to go into those in any details, but obviously happy to take any questions where I can. And then finally, I just wanted to update in connection with the national planning matters and where we are at. Members will recall back in 2000, and I have to get my year right because things move so quickly, 2020, the government consulted on fundamental and quite radical planning reforms to the planning system. There were considerable consultation responses that were submitted to the government on that. And I think it's fair to say that certainly over last year, when we were expecting sort of greater announcements, there has definitely been a change in connection with the government's approach to the radical overhaul of the planning system. So where we are now, we are still waiting. I think the mood music coming from the government is that It's much less of a radical reform, much more of an evolution, but no one actually knows what that means currently. So we're still waiting to find out from the government what changes are proposed. But as you'll all be aware, we do have a new Secretary of State, and I'm sure all of these issues will be under review. What we have had, though, last year, we have had a number of changes to the National Planning Policy Framework, very much surrounding a sort of design really being put at the forefront of development, which I think we'll all welcome. I think it's certainly been lacking historically. And as part of this, the government also launched a new office for place, and this is very much to sort of lead on the design agenda. So the NPPF basically brings forward a national model design code that all councils should be using, and it sets out a number of sort of requirements for how developments should look, as you would sort of expect. And a lot more sort of support for councils to refuse applications where design is not acceptable. I think the other thing that sort of happened, which does have an impact on planning last year, was the enactment of the Environment Bill has now been enacted. And again, that's something that all councils will need to take into account when we are reviewing our plans as we move forward. And as part of any local plans going forward, the whole climate change agenda is obviously something that we will all have to take into account as well. So, just to say there, finally, I wish I could give more certainty in connection with when we'll find out, greater detail of the planning reforms and what that actually means sort of for us. But unfortunately, I can't. And I think hopefully we'll have something soon, because I think it does cause uncertainty for the development sector. But I think all councils are quite rightly taking the view that we don't pause, we carry on with our plans to ensure that we have the plan-led system. Happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm just looking around if anyone's indicating. See any at the moment? Oh, sorry, Roger. Sorry, Roger, we can't hear. So I've lost your window now. Sorry, Roger, we can't hear you at the moment. Looks like you might have connection issues. Right, we might have to come back to Roger then. In that case, I'll go to Nikki first of all.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that. Regarding the environment influence of the environment legislation on the local plan, is that all settled now? Has that all been through all the Parliament stages, and we know now exactly what effect that has on the NPPF?
Yes, we do. So the Environment Bill has now been enacted, so that's now legislation. So the key impact, obviously, for all councils, well, there are a number of issues, but the key one that we need to be taking into account is the biodiversity net gain legislation, which is very much around ensuring that all new developments, there is net gain. So if a developer, for example, wants to develop, we need to make sure if there's any loss of green space or biodiversity, then alternative sites have to come forward, and there's a whole issue in connection with how we do that, and working with farmers to make sure that we could collectively sort of have a number of areas that could contribute to this biodiversity sort of net gain. But yes, to answer your question, it's now enacted, and that's something we all have to take into account.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll try Roger again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we've got you, Roger. Yeah.
Good. Okay. I had a couple of questions coming out of the report, really. One that's sort of topical, and one that'll be with us probably for a very long time. But both really about anticipating when these reports are written, and I don't mean your immediate report, but the whole JCS, etc., planning process, sort of anticipating how things may move forward in terms of the way laws and opinions may change. So the two examples are, one was the statutes, where the references to a policy of retain and explain, and this is what, if you like, Bristol Council was doing very slowly over a period of time, until a number of people decided it was time to speed that process up by throwing the statue into the harbour. And cutting a long story short, which we all know, and the courts decided that, broadly speaking, those people were right and Bristol Council was wrong. And I think, without going into the details of that case, I think the point being that we may that policy may be changing, and it may be more of a case of move and explain than retain and explain. That's sort of one example, but the more long-term one, and the one that concerns me actually a lot more because of its future implications, is on in the whole report there is a huge amount of reference to infrastructure, but it's all about roads. It is as if nothing else is relevant to the infrastructure, as in cycleways, as in railways, as in where buses affect the infrastructure, because I would expect all of those things to be changing the emphasis about what you do on roads, and indeed what the requirement is in terms of capacity on carriageways and so on. If we're serious about climate change, we should be expecting modal shift, and we should be expecting the infrastructure to be different as a result. So with the concentration on my second question, I put it back to you, Chair.
Are you happy to pick that one up?
So yes, please do. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So just you're absolutely right. You know, the whole issue around infrastructure and with the whole climate change agenda, we do need to look at the whole modal shift, but obviously people have to have a choice as well. So all councils will be working with the county council, who are the lead highway authority, in connection with what plans. You know, the council has an adopted local transport plan, and that's something that we all need to be working closely with the county with, to understand what are the opportunities for new cycleways to link various sort of areas up, and to make sure, particularly where we have large scale developments, that we have integration of cycle and pedestrian links across the different developments. So that's as far as I can, unless Colin or Simon want to add anything to that what I've just said.
So yes, Simon, please do. Oh,
Sorry, Chair, I'm struggling to unmute. Apologies for the delay, got there eventually. Yeah, all I would add to what Sandra said there is that we at the County Council comment on all planning applications apart from the extremely minor ones, and ensure that the district councils, who are the local planning authorities, are fully aware of the County Council's requirements in terms of future infrastructure, and similarly we comment on all emerging local plans. So you've got the documentation there about all the emerging local plans throughout the county, and we are a partner obviously with the Joint Core Strategy Authorities, for instance, in terms of ensuring that the emerging JCS should fully reflect all of the infrastructure requirements that we have. That list of infrastructure requirements is obviously lengthy, but it would incorporate all aspects that the County Council statutorily has, such as highways and transport, and as has just been alluded to, that's not just roads, but that would include rail infrastructure, active travel, walking, cycling, public transport, mass transit, etc., etc. And it's not just highways and transport. Obviously, there's a plethora of other infrastructure that we have as well, which might be related to schools, both primary and secondary, libraries, flood alleviation, broadband, waste disposal, fire and rescue. The list goes on and on and on. We do have an annual requirement to produce an infrastructure funding statement, and that's produced by the end of December each year. So that is publicly available on our website at the moment, hot off the press as of a few days ago. So all the information is out there for the public to see. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next on the list, then I've got Gina. Happy to.
Yes, thank you again, Matt. Yeah, I don't know if my questions are really particularly relevant to this, but the greatest concern we have in the Cotswolds is the affordable housing actually not being affordable for local residents. What we're trying to like to do is to support that they can stay in the area where they're born and brought up if they wish to, and afford to live there. And additionally to that, what's happening so often, and even in these new developments, is people buying up these houses to let out on Airbnb and things. So we have got a lot of our smaller old cottages and other housing, and even this new housing, going to the holiday market one way and another. So what I would really like to see is that we are looking to make sure that we support those people who wish to stay in the area and they can afford to do so. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I don't know enough detail about sort of the Cotswolds and sort of what's happening there, but I think across the board, you know, this whole issue of affordability and certainly with the whole issue of the first homes requirement as well, and how that's been introduced. I think all we can advise, and I'm sure all councils are doing this, is in connection with like the housing needs surveys and the affordability, and having that evidence base to be able to sort of, when developments are coming forward, is to ensure that, you know, with that right balance of the affordable housing units. But it is concerning to hear that some of those affordable housing units are being used for Airbnb and all that type of thing. And to be honest, I'm not quite sure what can be done about that. I'm not sure what to advise. I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you. I'm not sure that they all are, but the proportion of things is changing, and it really makes, you know, pressure on those people who haven't got a very big budget. You know, everything else which takes away some of the available housing market impacts on them. Thank you.
Okay, I haven't got anyone else looking to ask a question. So I just want to say thank you to Mike, and particularly to Sandra for that item. I think it's a really good one to have an update on a regular basis. I mean, hopefully we can kind of have that as a standing thing. It's an annual report, if I'm right. So yeah, if we can, I think it'd be great if we can have that as a standing annual item, if that's
absolutely right, Chair. We tend to do this annually. It sometimes gets slightly delayed by what's going on, but it is an annual report, and it's intended really as a bit of a reference point for members, because it's not always easy to remember all the things that are going on in planning terms across the county, and how that might impact on inter-authorities needs. So it is something that planning colleagues put together on an annual basis, just to update across the county. So I'm glad, Chair, that you feel that that's helpful, and we'll bring a further update in 12 months' time. We might bring one earlier if things move on a bit quicker, but at least in 12 months' time you can expect a further report. Thank you, Chair.
No, that's great. Well, thank you both. Okay, the next item we've got on our agenda then is around the work plan. Obviously, hopefully you've all got the list in front of you. What you can see from there is obviously from today's meeting we had a couple of items that have been moved back for various reasons. So I think we're once we know exactly what sort of dates we can look at for those, we'll try and get those scheduled in. So particularly around youth unemployment, and also the item around climate change, but particularly the sort of, well, the economic impacts, obviously given the remit of this committee, and particularly green jobs. I guess what we want to do in the work plan item, though, is that we've got a number of other sort of suggestions that have been put forward at the planning meeting for this session. So really just to kind of get people's thoughts around which items are, you know, the most pressing, what ones we'd like to have at future meetings, the next meetings coming up in particular, and indeed if there are other items that people feel would be good to cover, then absolutely we want to get those added onto the list. I'll sort of open it up to questions and thoughts from everyone. Roger, I've got you first.
Thank you, Matt. I was looking at the item on driver shortages on buses, and thinking, well, yes, that's an important item, and being the optimist I am, you might even hope that the problem would disappear before we get to the meeting. But my suggestion is that we raise the priority of that, but we widen it, because there's only so much that you can say about the driver shortages, and the sort of wider and perhaps more important and interesting thing would be to have a dialogue with the bus companies about to what extent that they are willing to engage with us as commercial companies, because the world is changing with the bus service improvement plan, and to really talk about what they provide and how they provide it, and I think because we are the business committee rather than the environment committee, although I appreciate it would be a joint meeting and I'm on both, but I think we should also retain a focus on the fact that they have an important contribution. They're businesses in themselves, and they have an important contribution to make to the economy of Gloucestershire. If we can get good commuting to work, then that kind of unlocks some of the problems, particularly for 16 and 17-year-olds, but for a wide range of people who can't necessarily afford to drive cars, and environmentally we're not encouraging people to be driving cars if we can provide good bus services. So I think there's a case for raising the priority of that and widening it really to bus service provision and business in general.
I think that's a very sensible suggestion, and we'll speak to the Environment Committee as well. Obviously, I know we've got Dom on the call, obviously, but we'll try and arrange a session, a joint one on that. When we can, depending on how the calendars work. But I would hope that that's one that can be brought forward relatively quickly. Albeit that we want, if we want external speakers to come in, we need to obviously fit around them as well. But I think that's a really good suggestion. Nikki, I had you next.
Oh, thank you. Under possible future items, item 3, modern methods of construction. We've had a couple of sessions on that. I wondered if you could explain what this would, the proposed session, how that would work with what we've already had. Thank you. Yeah,
so the logic behind that one is that the modern methods of construction was kind of a 3-part meeting, and we obviously got Mike. We heard from Mike in the last item. I don't know if Mike, you want to say any more, because I know you've been arranging this one, but this is kind of to get the larger developers to come in, or hopefully get them to come in and speak to us. But Mike, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, you've had 3 sessions as a committee, although not all members, because of elections, will have been on the first one. But we've looked at the general background for modern methods of construction, the various types, and what's available. We've also looked at and had some discussions at the last session with a range of different builders, if you will, providers, manufacturers of modern methods of construction of different sizes. And the next session was to invite developers, national level and also Gloucestershire level, to come into the committee and have a discussion about the issues that they face in actually bringing forward and using modern methods of construction, and what their views of the various types of construction are. The aim then would be to pull together a report from those 3 sessions that will come back to you for your approval, and then take that as part of the chair's updates to the joint committee for dissemination around the various member authorities. So the only question, I guess, Chair, with that item 3 on possible future items, given the amount of questions that members had and the length of discussion that we had with the manufacturers, is whether members want a separate specific meeting with the developers, or whether you want to put it as an item on a as opposed to a standalone item, a routine item on the committee's agendas going forward. I mean, I'm happy to arrange it either way. But that I was just conscious that members had loads of questions, and we had lots of discussion at the last session. It's really what members of the committee wish to do with that. But I would suggest that we probably need to do something over the next few months in order to bring that piece of work to a close. Thanks, Chair.
No, thank you, Mike. I think, yeah, if we do have it as part of a normal meeting, so to speak, I think we just need to be mindful that we don't have too many extra items on the agenda as well, because as you say, we need to be mindful of the timing. But equally, I think to bring this one forward, we don't want to leave this one too long. We want to try and ideally sort of wrap this up within a sensible period, so that we've when officers are putting together a report, it's kind of all relatively fresh in people's minds. Happy to take any other thoughts on that. I can see Rebecca, I've got you next on the list. If you want to come in.
Hi, yeah,
Sorry, Rebecca, you're very faint. Sorry, we can't. Sorry, Rebecca. I can tell you're speaking. We can't hear. Can't make out. I'm afraid. So if we go to Gina.
Can you hear me?
First.
Can you hear me now?
Sorry. Yes. Yep. We've got you.
Okay. Good. Okay. Sorry. No, I wanted to put in my bid to raise the youth unemployment item promptly onto the agenda. I know it's been delayed, but I'd like to get it factored in. Several thoughts on that one. One is that obviously we all know that the last couple of years have been a pretty torrid time for everybody, but the demographic that one could argue has been most significantly affected is the younger members of our population, not just in education but in their employment prospects as well. And I think that we could perhaps ask for some input from some of our local providers. Obviously, I'm in Cirencester. We have the extremely excellent Cirencester College that does a tremendous amount of work in terms of employment opportunities through some of the qualifications, through the apprenticeship scheme. I know that there are other providers around the county. I recently attended an army engagement evening. Neil Hopwood was there as well, in fact, and they were presenting an awful lot of opportunities that they have for young people. We might want to get some input from some of our members who are part of the education education portfolio, to look at ways that we can be actively involved in schemes that are mitigating the impact of this last couple of years on our young people. Not everybody is looking at an immediate academic future. We need to make sure that we are cementing opportunities into the workforce for our young people as they leave education, but also in their opportunities that they've missed to go from that first job to their second job, you know, and that means finding accommodation and all the associated opportunities that come with it. So yeah, that's my shout out. I'd really like to get that on the agenda.
I think that's a really useful, yeah. I mean, we had hoped to have it on for today's meeting, but I know the speaker wasn't available, so hopefully we'll see about the next meeting. But yeah, I completely agree on. Hopefully, other members of the committee will be keen to make that one a priority.
Thank you.
Okay, I've got Colin indicating to speak. Sorry, Colin. Oh, I think you might be on mute.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. I'm having trouble getting for some reason on my iPad this morning. I can't get an electronic hand up, so that's hence why I was using the physical hand.
Oh, right.
Apologies about that. Two things really. Picking up Rebecca's point, something we're doing. It's in its early stages at the moment, but we set up an employment and skills hub at GCC, and so it's been running now about 2 months. And maybe at a future meeting, it might be worth us coming along and saying how it's going. For those who don't know about it, what it is we set it up as part of our response to the economic recovery following COVID. And it's a one-stop shop where anyone, I mean, it's aimed specifically initially it was at young people, but particularly those people who may be in care, maybe disadvantaged, disabled. So we have job brokers there that are disabled themselves and been in care, so they can make that connection. And young people generally who may have missed their way, having left school and not got qualifications, we're linking that into our adult ed and other colleges, and also the facilities there for people in mid-career who suddenly find that due to the pandemic that their jobs no longer exist, and therefore they want to look for something else. So it's a one-stop shop basically where people can come along, talk face-to-face, or it could be done virtually. We can put people towards, they can talk through the sort of careers they want. They can then look at what skill bases skills they've already got, or where they need to enhance those skills, and we can point in the right direction either through adult ed or other areas. So and it's right across the board, as I said, from sort of disabled and children leaving care, for example, right the way through to maybe people in midlife who find themselves without a job. So that's something. It's not quite fully functional yet, but it's been running now since the end of September. So that might be something that you might want to hear about. And also, we're linking that with the skills strategy that we're working very closely with G First on. At the same time, as part of that, what we intend to do, although the centre is in with adult education within Gloucester itself, our aim is to have outreach and provide outreach within the libraries, within certain areas. So effectively, it doesn't rely on everyone coming into Gloucester to get that support. So we'll run clinics within our libraries. We've got to get established first and roll that out. But that's the aim over the next 6 months to offer that extended service. The other thing I was going to say, that was really in response to what Rebecca said, but it might be something you may wish to listen or hear about a little bit later. But the other thing that we are now doing at GGEC is, I felt that quite often members, and I don't mean to disrespect it at all, but people react to a situation that they hear but may not have the evidence to support. So what I've introduced at GGEC now is an economic dashboard that is updated and provided each time with the latest figures and information. And I felt that maybe as a scrutiny committee, that might be useful for you to be presented with, if not every meeting, then every other meeting or something like that. But it gives you basically a position statement where we are in terms of what was furlough, but equally unemployment, young people not in jobs. The way jobs are going at the moment, where the latest employment figures are, where the latest jobs are, what a number of jobs that have been advertised are, all that sort of figures. So I just wonder whether that might be of use to you as a scrutiny committee to have that sort of solid data that you can look at, and then rather than sort of have a sort of a gut reaction, what you've heard in newspapers, but actually have sort of solid data you can actually work with from a GCC perspective, or a Gloucestershire perspective.
I think that would be really useful, Colin. Yeah, to have, like you say, if it's a quarterly or whatever it might be, I think that would be really useful to have that report. So I know at the joint committee, it's a really useful one. So yeah, that would be fantastic. And around the skills hub, again, I think that would be a great addition to have at one of the sessions. I could see Rebecca said the same in the comments. So yeah, I think that would be a really useful one. Gina, I've got you next on the list, if that's.
Thank you very much again. Yes, I'm interested in the farming, agricultural, food production. I understand that the Hartbury, the Royal Agricultural University in Cirencester and BRI are working together on agri-tech and things like that. But it goes beyond just that. I mean, I think it's wonderful. They're such an important part of our landscape, the farms and things, and the environment. And I would be very interested to have more updates on how that's going and what they're up to. So I would like to hear that in the future. Thank you.
Okay. Again, on that one, just to say, I know there's sort of a report ready to go. It was more we just need to tie in with the external speaker on that one. So, but yeah, hopefully we can get an update on that one scheduled in quite soon. Andrew, got you next on the list, if that's.
Thanks.
Sorry, Andrew. Oh,
thanks. No, I'm here. Yeah, to say, Colin, it would be good if you anything on opportunities for the care leavers that you could perhaps let the Children and Family Overview and Scrutiny Committee know, because one of our remits is care leavers, and we're very conscious that a good percentage of those in Gloucestershire are what we would call NEET, not in education, employment or training. So anything that is being done to promote the employment opportunities of care leavers, I think our committee would be very keen to hear about. Thanks.
Okay. I haven't got any other people looking to make comments. The one I did just want to raise a bit more was around the green jobs item. I know Democratic Services sort of asking around whether people have more of a steer on exactly what kind of areas people are thinking of when we're looking at that item. I don't know, not necessarily to put people on the spot today, but if people have got particular aspects they would like to focus on that one, because I know it's obviously such a big topic. Sorry, Chloe, I can see you're indicating equally. If people want to chip in separately, that's fine too.
I think it was me that suggested this, or one of the people who suggested this. And I guess, I'm interested in what the council is doing to support the development of green jobs and low carbon industry across Gloucestershire, really. So initiatives within the council, within the LEP, and within our further education providers across Gloucestershire, that sort of thing. That's just want to make sure that we're doing as much as possible to stimulate the kind of industries that we need in Gloucestershire to support a low carbon future, really.
Okay, thank you. I would say again, hopefully we can try and get that one on one of the sort of fairly one of the more upcoming agendas. Obviously, 'cause I think again it's very topical, isn't it? Okay, I haven't got any other people indicating to speak, so if we will wrap up on that item, I think that gives us quite a good list to sort of plan the calendar going forward, and hopefully gives quite a good the direction on a number of the items. So thank you very much for that one. I'll just jump back to the agenda, the main item. So that covers off the sort of the main items on the agenda. The next one is just to say, or item 6, sorry, is just dates of future meetings. Hopefully everyone's got those in the diary. So yeah, hopefully everyone's got those in there. And then the last item is the Executive Director's report. So that's from Colin. It's just one to note. Don't know if anyone, whether Colin's happy to take any questions if there are any, but just to say that one's to note rather than there's no presentation as such on that one. Oh, sorry, Chloe again.
I just had a question for Colin on the SIL funding, and this may be to do with my lack of experience as a councillor as much as anything, but I often see comments sort of bemoaning the fact that SIL funding never comes from the districts, and I suppose I also see that from the other perspective, and we've just been through our SIL decision-making process in Stroud, and the bids, when we're assessing bids as a district council, we have to look at whether they fit with planning policy, whether they're defined projects, whether they're due to happen in the next year, and so on. And the bids that came from the county council didn't meet those criteria, so they weren't funded. So I wonder whether that's the case across all the districts. I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, Colin, and what you think that the problem is, and whether there's perhaps a mismatch between the experience of district and county.
All right. Well, I've got to be really careful here, but I probably won't, because I've never been one of my strengths in life to be measured. I mean, SIL is dysfunctional, full stop. It has little or no benefit for unitaries. My last authority, when I was at a unitary, we agreed, and I'm so glad now looking back, we did agree that we weren't going to pursue SIL, and we carried on down the more traditional route of Section 106. And I know that, having spoken to my colleagues where I used to work, I'm so glad that I made that stand, because they are still collecting the sorts of amounts of money they need for education purposes and other vital infrastructure. SIL was done, let's be honest about it, in many respects to try and make development more acceptable to the public by allowing within it a neighbourhood plan, and those that had neighbourhood plans could immediately then cream 25%, I think, of the money off immediately for their own local neighbourhood. On top of that, the district was then allowed to add an administration charge. So before you've even started, I think the administration charge is 5% or something like that. But basically, you're looking at probably 30% of the money going before, for sometimes feel-good factors rather than actual doing what really is necessary to drive the infrastructure. It's going to be absolutely vital to support that development, whether that be a school, whether that be transport, whether it be the libraries, all the stuff invariably that the counties are responsible for providing. So what happens is that what is happening is that the private, although technically we could still go for Section 106, and we do, the developers push back and say, oh, you're double dipping. You've had your chance already with SIL, and you're not going to get any money out of us for Section 106 for the major infrastructure. The trouble is, what comes in for SIL is so small compared to what we used to get for Section 106 claims against the developer that we're absolutely hammered. And we're being taken, in no short term, we've been taken to the cleaners by developers, basically, who licking their lips and walking away with their pockets full of money at the expense of the public. Not to put too fine a point on it. SIL is, as I said, SIL is dysfunctional. The levels that are set are inadequate to even pay for local facilities to meet local needs, or barely, yet alone the bigger strategic needs that the county desperately require to meet and mitigate for the development. And at the moment we haven't got major, if we get some of those major developments going, like West of Cheltenham, like Tewkesbury Garden, we've got to be so careful, because we could find ourselves with huge great holes in our bills. I mean, I'll ask Simon to comment in a minute, because Simon's got the figures almost to his fingertips, I would guess, because he's sort of, it's his bête noire every day when he wakes up. But it's hopefully I don't think I put the case too strongly for the accused. But I mean, to me, I would bury Seal tomorrow and go back to the old methodology. I know probably some of my colleagues in districts wouldn't agree with me, but it's not. It doesn't get us where we want. There is one authority that we have got some money from, which is Stroud, to be fair to them, and they allow us to bid with others for their pot, some of their seal money they have available. But in respect, to be honest, it's pennies compared to where we were before. It's literally, you know, it's a drop in the ocean. It's, you know, a few thousand here and a few thousand there, not the sort of millions we were gaining before for major infrastructure that was required to meet the needs going forward. Simon, I hope I haven't given too black a picture, but I think I've been reasonably fair, even for me.
With your permission, Chair, yes, Colin said pretty much what I would, although perhaps I wouldn't word it quite as strongly, but I completely agree. Certainly of the 5 district councils that have implemented SIL in Gloucestershire, the exception being the Forest of Dean, only one of those district councils, which Colin's just mentioned, Stroud, have actually dished out any monies to the county council. And obviously the county council, as I've alluded to earlier, is the key infrastructure provider in the county. Whilst I haven't had the time to get the data up in front of me, I do have the data. And in terms of our Section 106 monies that we have received, the infrastructure funding statement that I referred to a few minutes ago does outline the very worrying trend of the severely depleting monies that we are receiving from developers through Section 106. So from memory, it's in the region of about 4 financial years ago, we were getting one in excess of £10 million per annum, and year on year for the last 3 financial years, that has been severely depleted for the reasons that Colin's just outlined. So we're in a bit of a lose-lose here at the moment, because on the one hand, we're not able to get the money from developers through Section 106 for the reasons Colin's just outlined, and we're not able to get, well, we are able to get SIL money, but we're not getting SIL money, unfortunately. And obviously the big money is currently being held by the JCS authorities, and at present, as I've said, we haven't received a penny of that SIL money. So it's on our strategic risk register. It does give me sleepless nights on occasions, because we're talking a hell of a lot of money here. We're talking extremely important infrastructure, which quite simply we are not able to deliver, because we're not getting the money from the developers stroke the district councils. So it is work in progress. I don't think a month goes past that I don't have meetings with the relevant authorities. And what I would say, which Colin hasn't, is that we are reviewing the Joint Core Strategy SIL arrangements. That is subject to an ongoing review, and I'm hoping that probably this time next year, when that review is completed, we're hoping to be in a much better position post that review. But as things stand, the issue is of great concern, and I can provide the data on request. As I said, it's in the infrastructure funding statement, which we released only a few weeks ago.
Thank you. That's helpful, and that does help me understand. I mean, in Stroud, we had 400 grand of SIL to play with this year, and we had bids in from county of around 6 million, I think. So we were a bit like, well, what do you want us to do with that? Like, we're not magicians, but you'll be pleased to hear we've reserved for months of money for next year, and I think the projects will be a bit more defined from county. But okay, thank you.
Can I just ask on this one, just as a sort of follow-up? I mean, is this something that can be resolved by districts and county working better together, or is it just that, I mean, as Colin said, you know, that it's just not, the system doesn't work? Is there a way of making SIL work, I guess?
We're hoping we've brought consultants in, jointly funded by us and the districts, to look at, you know, to see if there is a way of making this work better. Hopefully there will be. I'm hopeful, but at the same time, I'll be honest with you. While still exists, unless SIL is driven to the level that we used to get, the hurdle in terms of what the amount of money we need for certain things is driven to the level that we could get from Section 106. So therefore, there is that large sum, as Chloe's just said, £400,000 from Stroud. Well, I bet if you look back, we were probably getting millions from that area from work we were doing beforehand. So you've got to see that the SIL is discounting the amount of money that used to come in. Is that a district's fault? A little bit, but it's also a system fault by actually the way it's set up and the way it operates. When a developer comes in and they want a large development, that is the time to go eyeball to eyeball with them and say, well, if you want it, this is what we need, and if I don't get that, you're not going to get it. SIL is almost too gentle in certain respects because it sets out a plan of this is what we'll get, but doesn't allow for a site by site negotiation to take place to secure. What I would do in the past, and I have done in the past, is as soon as I had a original site coming in, first thing I would do would be get external consultants to do a valuation of that site. So I knew immediately what the uplift on that site was, what the developer was making, and what the super profit was if it was a green site. I would then know exactly what I was playing with, and I know how much they're going to put in their pocket, and I know exactly how much I could go for. SIL doesn't allow me to do that because SIL's already set out well in advance in a document set several years ago how much we expect on a roof tax or whatever it might be. So it doesn't allow for that individual negotiations to take place. And if you try to do that, because SIL has not been at an adequate level to get you the money for the schools or whatever, and the developers know that, we go in and the first thing they scream is foul, double dipping. You can't use Section 106. We've already put our hands up for SIL, and that's where the problem really lies. I'm hoping there's a way forward. In my heart of hearts, I probably think there probably isn't to get us to where we need to get to, unless, and I think the only way you would do it is you absolutely take SIL down to a base level, which is SIL is there for some of your place-based stuff and some of your niceties to keep, that people might like in an area, putting benches out in parks and things like that. But when it comes to the serious stuff, that is not in SIL, and it's deliberately left out SIL. We make a statement that that's not included in SIL, and every site maybe over 50 houses or 40 houses will be subject to a Section 106 agreement according to the needs at that moment in time, and then it's left to that individual development to take place. The problem with SIL as well is, I've always joked about it, is you only ever get it right twice. You get it right once as the market's going up and once as the market's coming down, because you set your stall out. So if you're in a market that's going up very, very quickly, basically the developer wins. If the market's collapsing, everyone loses, because what happens is there's not enough money to pay you the money that's set for SIL because the market's dropping. So the developer sits there and says, well, I can't afford to develop because I can't afford to pay that fixed sum of money. Where Section 106 has that flexibility that you can, for anything over a certain size site, I would argue that maybe anything more than, I don't know, a certain value of 30 or 40 houses, then it's not SIL. It shouldn't be SIL. It should be negotiated on a Section 106 basis. It should be outside of the SIL process, or you have a base level of SIL for local neighbourhood needs, which is what SIL was really aimed at, to make it attractive in that respect for local people, and everything else of a major type of infrastructure, whether it be libraries, schools, transport, whatever, is dealt with through Section 106. So, I mean, that's a personal view. Simon, would you disagree with that?
Just continued problems unmuting. Yeah, agree entirely, and that is part of the rationale for why we are reviewing with the three local authorities in question the JCS SIL arrangements, and the outcome of that, it is hoped, is that we will basically be enabled to go back to the what I call the good old days of sitting down with developers and negotiating Section 106s and getting these millions of pounds, which we're currently not securing, rather than at the moment sitting down with developers and they're just telling us where to go because they're saying we're paying SIL and we're not going to give you a penny for Section 106. So we're hoping for the JCS authorities that the situation will improve. With Stroud, Chloe, you've just given a perfect example there where we require millions of pounds worth of infrastructure. We have historically secured millions of pounds worth of infrastructure, and yet we get the email from Stroud saying, ever so sorry guys, we've only got, I think you said 400 grand available for the whole year. And that's going to be dished out to all infrastructure providers, not just you, County Council. You're just one of many who are bidding. So we're really on the back foot there because what do I do there? I can't say to Stroud, well, actually, we prefer 6 million quid. Please write me the cheque, because you haven't got the money to pay us. So it's not coming from developers. It's not coming from the district council. So it's a real problem and a real gap. So personally speaking, and Colin's already suggested that I'd like to see the back of SIL and go back to the good old days of Section 106, but unfortunately that decision is not with the county council, that's with the district councils. They and only they can be SIL charging authorities, so we're very much in the district's hands, but as Colin and I have just alluded to, we're doing everything we can to try and influence and change the current situation.
Okay, so I can see there's a number of people looking to come in. Dom, I've had you on the list for a little while. Is it SIL related or is it a separate?
Yeah, Matt, it is, and yes, it is. Much has been covered. And just to echo the frustrations from the councillor on the other side of the county, it is very frustrating. It is disconnected and it's dysfunctional. And I think just from an organisational methodological point of view, Colin and Simon, whether this is classed as a strategic risk or a strategic issue, the difference being a risk is that there's a massive hole in the road that you might fall down. An issue being you've fallen down the hole and you're in the hole, and whether or not we can wait a year to review it, or because every day we're all having these conversations about the disconnection between development and infrastructure, and waiting a year. I mean, is that just the mechanics of it, and that's just how long it's going to take? Because in a year's time, are we going to find anything different, or is it just going to say what we think is going to say, and we'll have to make a decision then about changing something, or is that just how it is and we have to accept it? I mean, it just seems really frustrating. And for me, one of my biggest issues in my market town, and I sense from councillors and colleagues, we're all feeling this. Thanks, Matt.
Through you, Chair, I can respond in terms of the process that Dom's asked. Why is it a year? And yes, that is very much process orientated. So the district councils in question, in this case led by Tewkesbury Borough Council with Cheltenham and Gloucester in tow, are very much providing me with their timeline, stating that it will take a year. In fact, it's over a year. We're currently within the process, but due to the requirements of data gathering and public consultations, and indeed there needs to be a public inquiry as well as part of all this. And as I'm sure you don't need me to tell you, all of that takes time, unfortunately. So the current timeline I've received from the JCS authorities is that it will be around this time next year by the time we get to a revised SIL, unfortunately. Is it a strategic risk? Yes, it is. Is it a strategic issue? Yes, it is. I've got it on the County Council strategic risk register. I update that regularly. The leader and lead cabinet members are regularly updated as to what the situation is. But as I've said, Dom, earlier, we are very much in the district council's hands. We cannot force the district councils to not implement SIL. We can't force the district councils to change their SIL. It's very much down to them as the charging authorities, but you merely have my assurance that we're doing everything we can to influence them.
Okay, I've got Mike on the list next. If this is on SIL, presumably.
It certainly is. As the SRO for the Joint Core Strategy, I'd just like to just make a comment, Chair, that the three authorities are fully aware of their county's position on this, and now the county have joined the JCS as a fully paid up partner. I've no doubt that we'll be working together closely to try and resolve what is a situation as set out by Colin and Simon. I think Simon's already made the point that we can't just change SIL at any time at a whim. There is a very detailed process to go around in terms of data gathering, and then we make decisions around that, but then we've got to consult, and then we've got to go to an examination in public, whether we like it or the county like it or not. What I would say, though, is that there is a spirit of working together to try and sort this issue out. And although it might take some time, hopefully we can deal with that. On the big sites at the moment, we aren't taking that much SIL because a lot of the sites within the JCS have been delayed. So from that point of view, we can sort of work together to try and get to a solution that works for the county as a whole. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, Nikki, I've got you next on the list. Is it SIL related? Or
Yeah,
is it?
it's not
Yes.
more a comment than a question. As you say, the first,
Please.
as has been said, the first of Dean are not on SIL. We have S106. What we're finding is that the very high education contribution that the county are requesting is taking up most of the S106 because it's really high. And at appeal, it has been successfully challenged by developers. I wondered, why is it so high? And is it because we're the only ones providing S106? Sorry, so I am answering questions.
Yeah, I don't know who's best to direct that one to.
I mean, I'll start off and no, it's not because you are the only ones, because we would only ask for Section 106 directly. 3 rules apply. It has to be directly related to get Section 106. It has to be directly related. It has to be proportional, and I can't remember the third one. It has to be directly related. It has to be proportional, and there's a third one, but there's something similar to that. But in essence, basically, we would only ask for the funding that is directly related to the site to mitigate the impacts that site is likely to cause. So we wouldn't, we're not collecting money for Stroud because you're the only FOD are the only ones doing Section 106. It wouldn't even be that, for the rest of FOD, we would be asking if there was a site that put pressure on our education system that we could not meet the places that are likely to be created through development, and there is a DFE formula. That's not our formula. That's a DFE formula, which is a pupil yield, which basically comes from DFE, that we use for calculating that figure. And then it's directly related to what that site is likely to generate and the impact. And if we've got vacant places in nearby schools, it's very difficult to actually argue that we should be paid money, and that discounts any money we're asked for anyway. So and there's sometimes where we would lose an argument because there may not be places in a school nearby, but there may be places in a school maybe 4 or 5 miles away, and the developer said, well, I'm not going to give you money for Section 106 for a new school or for new classrooms, but I'll pay for the transport costs for the next 4 or 5 years or something like that. So, things like that happen, but it is, hence what I've just said, it is directly related and it's proportional. Simon?
Thank you.
Really struggling on the ability to unmute today. Yeah, all I would add to that is that we are, in light of the Coombe Hill decision, which was last year in Tewkesbury Borough, you're correct, we were challenged quite heavily by Hitchens and their QC, and indeed the inspector at that inquiry. So since that inspector's report has been received, which was critical of the historic approach that we've taken to education contributions, the team have gone away and are currently going away to reevaluate exactly how we propose to request for education contributions in the future. So as part of that, we've got an interim position statement, and the team continue to analyse the data to come up with a formal final position as to how we negotiate education contributions in the future.
Okay, Phil Robinson, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Sorry about that. Simon mentioned earlier that he didn't have the figures to hand. I have got some of the figures to hand here, but I would agree with much of what has been said. Sorry, it's. I think the two-tier local government has resulted in SIL failing us abysmally. It's absolutely appalling. I mean, historically, we received something like upwards of 70% of developer contributions for education and libraries, and the SIL that we've received from the local planning authorities is very low compared to that historic Section 106 money. I mean, here are the latest reported SIL receipts from the 5 district councils, though I did get this data quite a few months ago. Cheltenham, £73,000, £47,000, Tewkesbury, £37,000, Stroud, £653,000, and Cotswold, £16,000, roughly. That's we're talking £830,000. Historically, the county council has negotiated and received several millions of pounds every year, sometimes well in excess of £10 million. And so those SIL receipts are absolutely woeful in comparison. So that gives you an indication in terms of the numbers. We won't be alone in this. We were one of the first councils to be affected by those legal procedures. But once those developers have tasted blood, other county councils, and some probably already, are going to end up in this situation. The precedence has been set, and it's my view that we cannot resolve this ourselves, and there's a real feeling of helplessness about it, and we needed central government to step in. We did make representations. I think we were asked to do so, Dom, as a result of the Environment Scrutiny Committee, and I certainly took those on board. I made personal representations to, in fact, I went to London and spoke to Robert Jenrick's SPAD about it. I've spoken to some other people, but then there were changes at the ministry. I was hopeful about what would happen in the forthcoming planning white paper, but things have stalled a bit. We had discussions with Michael Gove in October. Many councillors put a lot of pressure to try and do something about this. This is being felt. So I agree with Colin. It's you know, it's a difficult situation that we face, but it's not just we're not just going to resolve it by arrangements between the county council and the districts. It needs a lead to be shown higher up.
Thank you for that, Phil. So I hadn't appreciated this had already been covered at environment, but no, thank you. That was a really useful summary. Mike, I've got you to come back next on the list, and then Chloe, if that's.
I was going to lower the hand then. You just beat me to that. Chair. I think this is quite complicated as an issue. It isn't as straightforward as some of these things might seem. SIL, I agree, is not without its problems. It does have some advantages in that it's easier to pull than Section 106 and isn't wholly related to the individual site mitigation. The problem with the individual site mitigation issues is quite often, particularly for education, you end up with the last development in ends up potentially having to pay for whatever the extra educational requirements might be when all the other developments that have gone before perhaps have got away with it because there's been enough room in local schools and the like. So it isn't easy for us all. I think the issue is about working together. There may be something around speaking to national government. National government a little while ago said they were going to get rid of SIL. But of course that was going to be part of the overall planning changes which Sandra referenced, we haven't seen yet. So I think there are many issues around with this. And the other element, of course, is that the cost of infrastructure around all our sites increases as we go along. We've got some major infrastructure. It's not just education. What we're trying to get from the development that we need is some of the most large infrastructure projects that we've seen in Gloucestershire for roads and other infrastructure. And the districts are also trying to get, we mentioned it before this morning, affordable housing out of the sites. And when you tot it all up, quite a few of the sites in some areas become very difficult to deliver on that basis. It is complicated. There are particular issues to resolve, and I think by working together as the JCS and the County Council are doing at the moment, we might be able to improve the situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mike. And then last on the list, go to Chloe. I think fittingly, given that you sort of opened this item, so yeah.
And again, this might be a question coming from my ignorance, but it was my understanding that in Stroud, for example, that there is some 106 money as well. Is that not correct? So I mean, it was really interesting hearing those figures, but it's probably not fair to look at those in isolation if there is also 106 money coming from the districts. And I wondered how the amounts compare. I don't have a sense of that. Philip, do you have those figures as well?
Sorry, Phil, I don't know if you want to come back on that, whether you've got Section 106 figures.
Or just a sense of the scale of the two in comparison.
I'll interrupt if I may, Chair, in that you're perfectly correct, Chloe, in Stroud and indeed the other districts, apart from the Forest, we do secure both Section 106 and SIL, and each local authority will have a threshold. Colin alluded to it earlier. So the more strategic sites, for instance, and it varies from district to district, we continue to negotiate Section 106, whereas the more minor, smaller developments and proposals are subject to SIL. But as I said, that varies from district to district. All of that information, for fear of repeating myself, is in the infrastructure funding statement. I think I'm going to ask DSU to send the link with the minutes to this meeting to the latest infrastructure statement that the County Council's produced, and that states how much Section 106 and SIL has been received on an annual basis and how much has been spent on an annual basis. And I know each of the 6 district councils, as well as the County Council, statutorily has to produce that list, but I'll ask DSU through this meeting to provide the link to the minutes so you can see the data.
Thank you.
And sorry, Claude, asking me a question then. There was a problem with my sound all of a sudden. I heard my name mentioned.
Sorry, no. I just wondered if you had the 106 figures to sort of sit alongside those SIL figures, but it sounds like we'll be sent through a link to provide that information anyway.
No, it's a good question. I haven't got them, but they were provided by Simon's people to me originally, so I'm sure he'll pick up on that.
That's great.
Chair, it's Mike. I'm going to have to leave the meeting now. I have another meeting, unfortunately, so I should have to give you my apologies.
No, absolutely no problem at all. I think we're just about to wrap up, and unless there are any other questions on other topics for Colin's item, I think we can just double check the agenda, just to make sure I'm not jumping the gun. Yeah, we'll wrap things up there anyway. So just to say thank you everyone for your attendance today and all the questions and discussion, and yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for the
Thank you.
questions.
Thank you all.
Thanks all. Really enjoyed that last section.
Thank you. Thank you very much.